Hello, Scott. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Thank you so much for joining. I've been trying to get a hold of you for a while, but you've been very busy. You're balancing a couple of different gigs, and I would love my listeners to learn more about them. But before we get into that, can you please tell us, what do you do? Who are you?
Yeah. So the reason I've been so busy is because I just got done with a new Pluralsight course. So just got done with it's called Python for Salesforce developers. So I'm a Pluralsight author and put that course out. That was my 7th course. So I have a number of other courses on Salesforce, and then I'm also the senior applications developer at a company called NG North America, which is a energy company here in the Houston, Texas area where I live, and they do primarily renewables and natural gas. Been doing development now for about 7 years. So, yeah.
Cool, cool, cool. So you're a Pluralsight author, a senior developer, and then I think you also have your own company that makes some computer games.
Yeah, so I also have a strategy game out now that is called Calling Kingdom, and that was released last year. And I'm actually kind of gearing up for the rest of the year to do some revisions and some updates on that game as well. So,
Wow.
and that's available on Steam.
Wow, that's amazing, Scott. You seem like a really cool guy. Really, to be a Pluralsight author, I would dream to have one course. And you said how many courses you have there?
I have 7 now.
7.
Yeah,
Oh, oh
yeah.
my God.
I think I'm hoping to start an 8th one coming up here at the end of the year. Pluralsight they're currently trying to work on getting an experience put together where you can start from nothing and you can end up with certifications, right? They're really trying to cover their bases with Salesforce content. So I've been working on all of that for the past few years with them, trying to help get them to that point. And there's a number of other Salesforce authors, as
Yeah.
hopefully folks watching this know, right?
Yes.
Not the least of which, of course, is Dan Appleman, who he's one of the ways I kind of was introduced to Pluralsight in his original course that he had put together, which I think was called Force.com developers course, right? So yeah, him, Don Robbins had kind of pioneered on that platform, and they've been leading the way since. So
Cool, cool. Do you have the most number of courses out of all Salesforce authors?
Don Robbins, I think, holds that. He
Oh, okay.
has, I think, dozens of play-by-play courses now, and those are outstanding courses, by the way. It's wonderful hands-on sort of workshop content where you deal with very real-world stuff, and you have
Really?
like a series of they go through these exercises where you move through all the little details of a solution and ask all the questions that folks would think to kind of ask as they're building something. Very, very cool
Cool,
stuff. Yeah.
cool. And then Don Robbins is one of the preeminent Salesforce professionals and teachers that I've heard of in the
He's
Salesforce
amazing.
space.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so you're right in that pack. Cool. And what's perhaps is even cooler is where you started out. You are amazing Salesforce developer today, but back then you were not a Salesforce developer. You don't have IT background, even networking program background, not even like mathematics or some kind of a hard science background. Can you tell me about your background, please? Where you coming from? Where are you coming
Yeah.
from?
All the evidence says I am a very mediocre person at math. um, yeah. So I went to school for psychology and sociology, and I was very interested in human potential and learning. So that was my original intention. I kind of wanted to. Um, I think what I envisioned for myself is maybe going into clinical psychology or counseling while also sort of working my way into the research route and studying human learning. I had a huge interest in the human brain, and I believe very strongly and very sincerely that no matter where you come from, if you're generally speaking, if you're able-bodied, right, and you're all there, so to speak, human beings are capable of just incredible things. And that has always been fascinating to me, because it basically, there's statements that are said by brain science about how we're all capable of really great things, no matter sort of where we come from or what environment we're starting in. So, so that was what fascinated me about psychology. But then when I graduated with my undergrad degree in Bachelor's of Science, couldn't find any work. And so that led me into having to explore other options, because it was either that or taking out a very strenuous student loan to go to grad school, which I did not want to do, and I was terrified of doing at the time.
And so what, you couldn't find a job, but you had to pay bills. What were you doing?
Yeah, so I got out of college, and you know, I couldn't find anything related to psychology, because most of the good positions that you'll find for psych, you have to go to grad school for. So I looked at everything. I looked at construction work. I looked at you know, retail jobs, you know, cashier, sort of retail clerk stuff, stocking warehouses. I didn't know what I was going to do. I just got to a point where I said, okay, well, I've got to do something. And for whatever reason, I ended up working security guard jobs. And I was lucky enough toward the end of graduating, I believe the last semester that I was at the University of Houston, I ended up working a research assistant job for the sociology department there. And it was mostly just data entry. You know, it's entering survey results from these giant stacks of papers into an Excel spreadsheet. So it wasn't even data entry, you know, like that's not even where the Salesforce part of the story begins. It's still punching numbers into Excel. So that was where it all began. I did end up getting recruited by a temp agency and then going to work in more of a traditional office environment. But at that time, I was still working the security guard gigs. I kind of gave up the research assistant job eventually. I would still go out at night to work the security guard jobs while I started this other office gig. And the office gig was a litigation support company, basically making phone calls to retrieve medical records. And and again, you know, it's like, even though I was gradually improving my position very, very slowly, because I would get a better job for 20 hours of the week for a pay increase of like $1 an hour, maybe. And so I felt like I was barely making progress, but I was still struggling a lot at that point.
So you were working as security guard. How much were you making per hour?
So I had two security guard jobs. One was $8 an hour. Another one was $13 an hour. And the $13 an hour job was basically like this neighborhood patrol type thing. I worked for a homeowners association in a neighborhood in the sort of the east part of the Houston area. And you know, there's plenty of adventures that I had during that time. I had a woman who was off her medication, threatening people, and we had to call medical personnel to come and kind of restrain her. And that was an episode. I had there was another gentleman who decided that it would be a great idea to start a bonfire in his front yard. So I had these weird episodes during that job. House squatters. We had to call the police because there were people squatting in a foreclosed home, and they ended up escaping through like the backyard and hopping the fence. It was a wonderful time.
Wow. So from there you were doing this like almost minimum salary, probably not salary, minimum wage.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, it was
$8, probably, like very close to
yeah,
minimum wage.
$8 for one of the jobs. So the other job was I was in a parking garage, as so it was basically veterans housing that was being built. So there was basically a construction site, and I worked there for long enough over a number of months to see the building kind of come together. And yeah, by the end of it, I was in the parking garage. I would pull my car in, gates closed, basically working overnight. And of course, when I had started the office job, I kind of had to switch to working. You know, my sleep schedule was crazy because it's basically like I'd work the day job Monday through Friday in an office for a little while. And then I think there were still a number of weekends there where I would have to like roll my body clock around because I would have to like kind of sleep through the afternoon and then wake up to go do overnight shifts on Saturday. So
Wow.
yeah,
Could you ever imagine that you would become a Salesforce developer when you were a security guard?
it was looking pretty bleak, you know, and I think that's something that I think a lot of folks get stuck in that mental space because it is easy to look back in retrospect and to think about everything that is possible. And if you know the path in retrospect, you can recreate it for yourself. So if for some reason I had to start from scratch today, I know enough today to kind of know what direction I should start retreading again, right? But at that time, when you've never had that opportunity and when you've never had the experience of having one of these nicer positions, it is very difficult to imagine what that is like, or even to know that it's actually not as far away as you might think in some cases, right? And and that's tough. I think a lot of folks go through that. They feel that they are so far away from getting these things, from getting one of these jobs, right? And they're not actually as far as they think they are a lot of the time, I
So
think.
what kept you moving when you were in this tough situation?
So yeah, I mean, it was a degree of desperation. I was deep into credit card debt. I was, you know, and the funny thing is like you're not necessarily spending money where you shouldn't be with credit cards, uh, but um, uh, but sometimes you will because you're stressed out. Whenever you're under tremendous stress, your decision-making capability is also hindered. So occasionally, and that's all it takes. Occasionally, I would get this restaurant food, right, or whatever, stress eat, and you know that very in against my own interests that worsens the financial situation, right? So then before you know it, you have debt that is accumulating. The thought of taking out a student loan to go to grad school, right, is unthinkable, you know, because you're already feeling so sort of in a haze, right, whenever you're in that kind of a situation. So yeah, it's just strange. I guess is what I'm saying. That mental space, it kind of has a way of trapping you or deceiving you, right? But
But you kept
anyway,
moving. You kept moving.
that's right. Yeah, because then the focus becomes, well, how do I break out of this, right? What can I possibly do to go a different direction, or to, because you know you do see others, including some that, you know, if you've lived in the same area your whole life, you'll see folks you went to school with and they go on and they have success, and you're looking at your own situation and saying, well, where did I go wrong, right? And but the thing is like you see that success, you know that it's possible, but you you know that whatever you're doing is not working. And so that's kind of where I found myself. And so I sought to go that different direction. And with this particular office position, there was a very small bump up into middle management that I went and I applied for. And I've, you know, fortunately I got that position. And then it was a matter of, you know, less time making phone calls for this company and doing this very entry level thing, to all of a sudden there's a bunch of employees that I'm trying to help manage, trying to measure metrics, and it becomes a very different position, even though the pay increase for it was not very high. But the big opportunity behind that position was finding all the ways in which that group of folks could be more efficient, or could be more productive, or you could do more for that for that company that you're working for. So that was where it all kind of started. They were working with these spreadsheets, and my big question is how do I find a way to provide more value for this company so that I can get out of this current situation? How can I show them that, you know, I'm worthy of moving up in their ranks, right? And, you know, I should help to, if possible, right? If they see me as a person who's valuable, maybe there's a chance I could show them that I can move up into those more
So you
decision.
started out as a call center rep?
It was
Customer
basically a
service?
call center environment. It wasn't
Okay.
customer service, right? Because it was a litigation support company, and they're retrieving medical records for class action lawsuits and things like that. So I was making calls to retrieve these records, and basically I'm on the phone with medical providers all day. Then as I move into middle management, it's more of a question of all of a sudden you have this visibility into the fact that they're using Excel spreadsheets all over the place. But when you're making the calls, you're actually entering data into Salesforce. So that was my first exposure to Salesforce. And you know, it's funny too, because when I first discovered Salesforce, I had no idea that Salesforce was like this entire thing. I had no idea what it was at the time. This was back in 2013. And I was told that the company had an in-house development team. And so I was under the impression that they had built this entire thing by themselves, right? Had no idea that, no, actually what you're looking at is you're looking at a bunch of auto-generated page layouts. You're looking at custom and standard objects and so on, right? You know, or like the custom report builder, which I was using all the time in middle management to put together reports. Just had no idea that any of this stuff was actually super accessible, right? And then I kind of became aware of it increasingly, learning about, as I'm trying to figure out how to make certain processes more efficient, learning that, okay, we're using this platform called Salesforce. It kind of works this way. You know, there's this database and there's fields and you can click through and configure things and all that, right? But that all came a number of months into that job. And it also didn't come before I was building VBA macros for all these spreadsheets. So I wrote these macros, and it would aggregate data for them and put together sort of summaries and statistics about different employees who were filling out rows of data in these Excel spreadsheets. And then they said, well, do you think you could do Salesforce? And I said, I don't know, but I can try. And that led to inevitably, sort of in a management position, trying to self-teach myself Apex and Visualforce, and putting together a tool to automate one of their processes. So the big sort of flaw that they had at the time, and this is where the big opportunity was they had a lot of copy and paste. So phone calls, you would type a bunch of notes in a notepad, you would copy the text, you'd put it into a task record in the task description field, which, why would you do that when you could structure the data? You could put field values into these questions that you're asking on the phone. Then you could structure the data, then you could report on it better, and so on. But they had another process, which was basically when some of this data, in order to go and retrieve these records, it would get handed off from one department to another. So some of the time they would get documents, they would find references to other medical providers in these documents, and then they would use that to decide what other documents they need to then go and retrieve, right? So you're following the paper trail. So when they would do that, they would sort of codify the data, but it would be incomplete. And so your job when you're making these phone calls is to go and retrieve that data, essentially. But that whole process of how it makes its way from one department to another, that was very manual work. They had someone who would go in, take a record that was mostly a record full of different text values, and they would link it up to an account record, and they would start linking it to other objects in the database. So basically forming these relationships was this manual process where they're going into the Salesforce page layout, taking a look at the lookup field for these different objects to relate them to others and so on. And even the picking of the objects based on criteria, they were all doing this manually, which is insane. So the big value add was, well, how can you automate that process? How do you take the finding of these other objects throughout the database and form those relationships dynamically and automatically? If you could do that, you could save them dozens of thousands of dollars at a minimum every year. And at times when they were at a higher peak workload, I mean, that was in excess of $100,000 in cost. So that was the big first project for me. And there was another employee who had done something similar, and they were using a web browser macro to fill out fields. And you got to remember, this is in 2013, so this was Salesforce Classic, right? Or as today we call it Classic. Back then, that was just the UI. And macros that find different elements on the page could work pretty well. Lightning UI and trying to apply browser macros to that, that's like a whole different discussion we could have. But point is, it's a lot more difficult now. So another employee had done this, and he refused to hand over what he did for his own process. So the crazy part is that because they couldn't get him to hand over the macros he was using for this web browser plugin, they would let him sit at his desk and run the macros. And they would just pay him his hourly rate to run the macros to automate this process. And so they said, well, what do we have to do? And he said, okay, tell you what, if you pay me $10,000, I'll hand over, my process. And they said, no, we're not gonna hand over $10,000, right? And
It's
so
crazy though, because this guy developed the micro when he's on the job, right? Whatever he does on the job should be the company's property. And
that's true, but you know what? With intellectual property law, that's actually not quite how it works.
Oh,
So
really?
you sign an agreement at the very beginning of your employment or during your employment before you begin on something that says you're signing away the IP. The way that US copyright law actually works by default is if you create it yourself as an individual, the intellectual property rights actually go to you. A lot of people are unaware of that.
Oh, really?
Yes. Although, I would say ethically, in my opinion at least, whenever I go and I work for someone, if I'm working for you, and I'm creating something for you, that is your IP. If you're paying for it and I'm making it for you,
exactly, right?
That's yours, right? Yeah. So that's how I think about it. But anyway, so
yes.
they decided, no, we're not going to pay $10,000. So I said, well, look, why don't I build you something directly in Salesforce? I'm not going to charge you $10,000 for it, but I would like you to consider me for a job in the development team.
Wow.
And I was willing to do, at the time, I was making not even $16 an hour. But I said, if you give me this chance, right, and I prove to you that I can build this thing, just consider me. And the thing is that I knew that even if they were not at the end going to allow that opportunity to go through, because they could have just as easily, been very greedy, counting their dollar bills and saying, oh, well, he's getting paid $16 an hour and building a software. Why even change the situation? I knew that even if that's what they wanted to do, by the point I was in the middle of building all this, I was getting immersed in the reality of the job market, which is I had started scouring over hours of free YouTube video from Dreamforce. I was learning tons. I was studying for my first certification. And I knew that this was in such high demand that even when you start putting down Salesforce on LinkedIn or including it on your resume and uploading it to these job sites, these search engines algorithmically feed your resume to recruiters. So in the earliest days, even before I had succeeded in getting certified, there were starting to be phone calls of recruiters who were calling me and wondering, could I, do Salesforce related work or VBA? I was starting to get occasional phone calls here and there. There was actually one position early on for $25 an hour I turned down to write VBA macros for another company. So I knew that the demand was enough that even if they weren't going to offer me that developer position, someone else probably would, and there would be more opportunity. And the fact that I could put that item on my resume and say that I saved them anywhere from $30,000 to $100,000 a year, that is a major resume item, right?
That's
and
awesome.
I could talk about exactly how it worked. So
it's amazing. So you said, hey guys, give me a chance. If I do well, you guys hire me as a developer?
that's what I wanted. Yeah.
All right.
And
I'm excited to hear what happens next.
Well, yeah. So they, and they had done a little bit of that before with a couple other folks who worked at that company. But typically what would happen is they wouldn't quite make it to the developer position. They would get into kind of an admin sort of analyst role.
Mm-hmm.
And typically sometime after that, they would end up leaving the company. I can't recall who all the other folks were who went through that sort of journey with them, but there were a few. And but I think I was one of the only ones who did make it to an actual developer position. It was a junior developer position, and what actually happened is that they were only going to increase my pay by, I think, like a few dollars an hour. But that would have been enough at the time for me to accomplish what I needed financially. That was livable, right? Because by that point, I was approaching $20 an hour in 2013, which that's starting to be a reasonable living. But it was right around the point when they were about to do that. I ended up interviewing with another company, and I got another offer. And fortunately, they matched that other offer. For at the time, it was $60,000.
Wow, from $20 to $60,000.
60,000 a year. Yep.
So that's like from a part-time employee or like an hourly employee of $20.
That's right. Yeah. So
to 60 grand.
Yeah. So and so it wasn't even because I didn't take the pay raise with a few dollars up. So what it really was is it was almost $16 an hour, and going from that, which I think that comes out. Yeah, I mean it probably comes
Like,
out to like 23, 22,
no.
$24,000.
Isn't it like $30+ because plus benefits, PTO, all this? Probably
Yeah, there was some of that in there. Yeah, so I mean, let's just say it comes out to
30, at least $35 probably.
Yeah, maybe $35,000 a year. From that to 60, so it was basically a doubling, or in some ways more than a doubling of my compensation. Just like that, just that one offer, right? And that is just incredibly life changing.
Wow, doubling.
Yeah.
Within how long did it take you to double? 6 months?
No, I think it was about a year actually.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. But it was incremental because the jump, because you go from, if you kind of think about it, you're starting at 8 to 13. The office job was, I think, 13.50 an hour, something like that at first, and then a couple extra dollars for the for the supervisor position, and then jumping all the way to 60,000.
Yeah, this is more than doubling. Yeah, because even when you were making $15-16 an hour, let's say you work $2,000 now, that's like 30, but the full-time has all kinds of benefits. Yeah, so that's more than a double.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. All
okay, right. Wow. So security guard, data entry guy, like a call center guy, junior Salesforce developer.
That's right.
Cool.
And I don't know how easy it is to reproduce that route, because I think there's an aspect of that that is a little bit untraditional, which is that it's generally pretty difficult to start in a completely unrelated position and then work your way in, right? And the thing that I think really allowed me to do that was learning so much intricate detail about their business. But that is extremely powerful, and I've never forgotten that it's so incredibly effective when you have that domain knowledge of whatever the business is or whatever the organization is, and you're able to apply that to software. Um, and some of the, I would say to this day, some of the best work I ended up doing, just in terms of quality, was actually at that company because I was able to work so closely with everyone there. And I was able to build software literally kind of with someone sitting at my side, working through it with me in a way that, you know, today a lot of IT departments, they're generally a lot more disconnected, you know, because we have the business analyst who's collecting requirements and all these things. Everything is kind of translated from you, and it's not unusual for you to be, as a software developer, for you to be completely disconnected
Yeah, I
from
agree.
what the business process is. But if you can take out that separation and you can get closer to it and you can get that detail, that's when I think you can do your very best work.
So you went from like end user to the developer side, right?
Yeah, from the business user to the developer building the software with that knowledge of the business. Yeah.
It's amazing story how you got your foot in the door, because that's the most difficult thing. I feel like the first
Yeah.
step into the Salesforce space is the most difficult step. Like if it were stairs in the house, like the first step would be like really, really high, super hard, difficult to climb into.
Yeah, and I kind of lucked out, right? Because you don't always get that opportunity. I mean, with companies that when their technology is a lot more developed, you know, you're not necessarily going to get that same chance. It
Yep.
just so happened that they were still using a ton of Excel spreadsheets, and I could write those macros. It just so happened that they had not automated this particular process in Salesforce, and so I could do that, right? Not everyone is in that position. Not everyone even gets access to that kind of a chance, right? So
Yeah, but
there's definitely some luck in there.
definitely. But also, there's a lot of hard work in there, right?
Yes, yes, definitely so. Yeah.
So you got your Salesforce junior Salesforce developer role. How was it like? Were you struggling? Did you feel like you
Yeah,
could not
well,
make it? Maybe you overshot yourself?
yeah, you know, the thing you learn is all the code that you write. If you're self-taught and you're writing code, just you're learning from Stack Overflow, you're learning from Google, you're learning from even, you know, Salesforce documentation. You get little snippets and examples and little tiny little things, and you're kind of you're piecing things together the best you can. But some of those fundamentals, right, about object-oriented programming or just really sort of best practices around writing good code. All of that typically, I have found, comes later. And another thing, you know, I think beginners should keep in mind for people who are just now trying to go into this is you will write awful code at first, and that's okay. All of the code I wrote at the beginning of my career was terrible, but because of the circumstances, they were so happy to have it because it worked. You know, you can write code that is 100 times slower than it could be, but still thousands of times faster than a human being could do it. And it's awful code compared to what is possible, but still, even that little bit of automation is so incredibly powerful, right? Um, and that's what I always try to tell folks is that, look, um, you're thinking to yourself in some cases you're not good enough to write that code. Your code that you're writing, you feel lost. You don't feel like you're doing it the right way or whatever, and just don't worry about it because you will get better. You'll get that practice. You'll get mentorship as you grow and you progress. And it is never a bad thing once you, like you said, once you get your foot in the door. it's never a bad thing to be in a room where everyone in the room is smarter than you are, because you're going to grow tremendously from that.
Although your code might have been inefficient, the strength of your code probably was that it was very user focused. Yeah, you knew what users wanted. One of the problems is that a lot of developers could be good, but they code that's something that's not necessary by the users. So
That's right. Yes. Yeah, exactly. Exactly right.
so next, so you were working. This is you at this medical research consultants, right? You spent almost 2.5 years there as a developer.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and then you kept working, you learning there, and why did you decide to move? Or can you tell me about it?
Yeah, well, the funny thing is some of the things we kind of started the story with, as far as psychology and human
Yeah.
potential and all that stuff. I was still interested in all those things.
Uh-huh.
You don't necessarily change what you're interested in just because you end up in this other area. So, um, what I knew that I kind of wanted to do, if I was going to leave this company, was I knew I wanted to go and do something in the realm of science, and I wanted to be somewhere where I felt like I was doing uh, important work, from the standpoint of making some kind of a contribution that is more sort of emotionally fulfilling. I don't know if data collection for class action lawsuits is very, emotionally or spiritually uplifting in any way. Uh, even if the bills are paid, right? So we're moving up Maslow's hierarchy of needs, as we call it,
Yes.
right? I
You can.
I I was eating fine, and I could sleep comfortably at night, but then I was like, it'd be nicer to do something sort of more interesting or more profound. Um, uh, so I ended up. Here's the thing, right? I ended up getting, I think, 2 certifications before I left MRC. And once you get even one certification, and I don't know if this is still true, but it was certainly true, I think, back in 2015 or so, um, recruiters will just start calling you. As long as your resume is uploaded and well written, they will call you, and
Mhm.
you'll find that folks want to have conversations with you. Because I mean, especially at that time, it was pretty hard to come by Salesforce certified folks. I mean, it's still tough today. Even in my current position, trying to find really knowledgeable folks who are specialized in Salesforce, the demand is so high that even now in 2020, finding that qualified person can be difficult, especially because the pay rates are so high. So trying to find something that is within the company's budget can be tricky too. If you're willing to pay a high enough price, you'll find someone. But anyway, so now I've been on the other side of the table as far as the being the interviewer now as well, and kind of being closer to that management side as far as IT is concerned, and seeing what it's like trying to find these candidates. But anyway, so yeah, I ended up getting phone calls. I got uh, recruited to the next stop along the way, which was Sonova Energy, and that was solar, and that was sciencey enough for me. So I said, "Hey, yeah, solar panels and renewable energy. That sounds snazzy." And the offer was pretty high, from where I
Six
was
figures?
again. Not it didn't quite hit 6 figures right away, but that it came not long after that, and so yeah. So I mean, it was still, I'll just say, more than 20% at the time, and so yeah, I jumped ship, and it's funny, whenever you leave, you develop these emotional
Yeah.
attachments whenever you're leaving a place too, and I wanted them to kind of counter and match again, but they didn't, and So I ended up leaving. But the funny thing is once you leave, in my experience, you never feel bad about the next place you end up. So, and I don't just say that because of the higher salary, right?
But like, it's like after a breakup, right? Do you miss your like? It's very attached, right? You spent
Yeah,
2.5 years there. They gave you the first chance, like your first Salesforce developer job. So you feel very attached. Like you feel like you owe them loyalty, and that's
that's
also
right.
sometimes one of the reasons I'm afraid to leave. Like, should I go? Man, I feel really bad for them. What if they cannot find someone to replace me? What if they start losing money? Or I don't know. I start fantasizing these things, and
Yeah, and I knew so much about the business that I also I had grown to have such a fun time doing the work there because um, it was wicked awesome stuff that I knew so much about the business that when I was there, I had these plans for there's kind of a front and a back end of their overall process for that record retrieval department, and I was working on a way to automate almost everything. I had plans in place to do like their entire process, um, short of phone calls. But then, now we're looking at the possibility of AI voice assistants making phone calls for us now, which is crazy. But that's something that is realistically kind of on the horizon now. And so, who knows, right? What I might have been able to do if I had kind of stuck in it and uh, help them compete on the technology side. Um, I could have done some really incredible work, but they didn't counter, so I had to go. um, but I mean the opportunity there, right? To me, that's very exciting. I think that there's aspects of the personal side in terms of what I feel I'm doing for the world. I think when you go to bed at night, sometimes you kind of think about that, and that was kind of missing. But on the technical side, and just in terms of the problem solving and the challenge, there was a lot of exciting work left to be done. And so, anyway.
wow, cool. Since you were a self-taught developer, did you ever feel like you were not as good as guys who were computer science undergrads who had like more computer science experience? Did you feel ever
For the
inferiority?
Yeah, for the first 3 or 4 years, yeah, I felt that way, and I think I was accurate in feeling that way. It is good to get that fundamental foundation. It helps a lot with things. It helps in ways that some folks may not expect. But I also ended up learning a ton from those kinds of folks as well. So I learned a ton about writing cleaner, more organized code from those folks, and because I worked with them every day, and I also got to hear stories that were other career stories as well, and why um, early on you may dream about working for someone like Apple or Google. One of the folks I knew had worked for IBM, and he said, "Oh yeah, working for IBM was awful." He said to get anything done took months. You had to go through so much bureaucracy and the committees for everything, and it's like, well, it's like a lot of folks don't think about that with some of these kind of dream jobs. It may be true that that's sort of the hot thing is to go work for Twitter, Facebook, whatever, but um, the thing you have to keep in mind about these giant companies is you might have actually a much smaller voice in some of those places. It may not be what you expect, in other words,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Uh, So you went to this renewable energy company, very nice. Uh,
I did, and they have since IPO'd, which is kind of
wow.
exciting, I suppose. The company changed a lot over the years that I was there. I learned, again, that I would say first couple years, you learn so much. You will continue learning tons over the next 3 years. And I would say I'm learning a little bit less now, but it never really ends. You know, so I'm 7 years in now. It never really stops. And that company had changed a lot over the time I got there from whenever I left. It began as much more of a sort of startup environment whenever I first showed up there. The IT department was much smaller. I was one of the only Salesforce folks, and then I think by the time I left, they had more or less like 10 different Salesforce people, combination of developers, analysts, admins, all working there, project managers as well. They grew tremendously on the Salesforce side. They ended up expanding just across the board because they had lots of different programming languages. By the time I left, they had stuff written in Go, tons of stuff written in Python, and I ended up writing some of their Python stuff. So yeah, it was interesting to see. And I also saw the transition in the culture between the startup environment all the way to closer to the IPO, because you show up there in the beginning and there's like free food in the break room every day and all these little perks. But then that goes away because they're like, we're spending thousands of dollars on making all these employees happy, and you know, we've got to focus on what's coming next. This is not going to be sustainable to have free protein bars everywhere in the break room or whatever going into the future. So they changed that. One of the things that bothered me whenever I was at Sonova was the CEO used to say this phrase, which was, "We're not a tech company." He always used to like saying that. We're not a tech company. And what I've come to understand is that every company is a tech company if they want to survive.
Of course.
That is increasingly the case, and we are not done seeing that. And you know, he made comparisons. He said, you know, we're not Facebook, we're not Twitter, whatever. And you know, I get it. Yeah, you're an energy company, but the thing is that all of your competitors are trying to outperform what you can do. They're going to be working on getting better insights, faster installation times, better customer service, and they're doing all of that with tech. So that was one of my sort of big takeaways from being there, seeing what the perspective was, and then eventually moving on. So
cool. Around the time you were at Sonova, you became a Pluralsight author. Why did you decide to become a Pluralsight author?
I actually don't fully remember. I have a general idea. So as I said, I came across like Dan Appleman's content, and a lot of the other skills that I picked up outside of Salesforce came from Pluralsight. I was a Pluralsight customer before I was an author for about 3 years. I wrote my first .NET web service based off of a Pluralsight course, which was the WCF Fundamentals course, which was, I found out later, that's actually created by Pluralsight's CEO, and that was done very early in their sort of development. But I learned WCF from that, or at least some of the very basics of WCF, and I wrote an email web service for MRC before I left MRC. All of the Python stuff I learned from a course that is now retired, and they've restructured it into multiple courses, but at the time it was called Python Fundamentals. So I learned the entire sort of all of my Python language skill set from Pluralsight. Having premium training at your disposal is really powerful, and I can't really you know, I can't recommend it enough. Of course, you know, people watching this can say, well, he's an author, he's biased to say that, but I say that at, you know, first as a customer for many years for a reason as well, because I would say, you know, like before Pluralsight, I was also into like video editing whenever I was much younger and stuff like that. And of course, The video editing skills became valuable later as a Pluralsight author, but the way I learned all the video editing stuff was from a premium training content that was around many years ago, which I think at the time was like called like Adobe Total Training or something like that. But there's just something different about, you know, when you go to YouTube or when you go and you search the web, you really don't know the quality of the answers that you're getting, right? If you go to a service that has vetted someone, done an assessment of their knowledge, and you know they're a subject matter expert, and then you have very polished production quality from what they're giving you, and that you have a focused sort of message with what they're providing, that makes a giant difference to your learning experience. So anyway, yeah, a lot of the reason that I sort of learned Salesforce, all of the free resources out there, but I would say all of the things that has put my career to where it is now is because of all the things around Salesforce. So going back, and because I was not a computer science major, going back and learning the fundamentals and learning languages, learning how to integrate these other systems together, right? That was the big differentiator by the end.
So why did you become a Pluralsight author?
So I think it's because I felt like I could contribute something in that space. I knew that they didn't have nearly as much Salesforce content as what they really needed. And there was a point going back to the psychology days, and this is why I say I don't completely know, because I feel like I'm about to give you a rambly answer. But going back to the psychology days, you know, I was interested in self-improvement, personal development, all that type of stuff. And I always kind of wanted to be able to do something in that space to help other people. And Pluralsight seemed like a great way to do that. And the thing I think that's missing from these self-improvement programs or whatever is concrete skills or concrete sort of real evidence-based things. So whenever you open a Tony Robbins book or whatever, you know, don't get me wrong, there's tons of people who have found Tony Robbins or people like him to be super valuable, but there's something different to be said, like we kind of said earlier in the conversation about, well, with technology, you can see concrete results from something, right? Mm-hmm. So being able to teach technology provides that for folks. And if it ends up being the case that I pass this on, people launch their careers based on this content, that's incredibly meaningful to me, I think.
Wow. So you wanted to help other people achieve similar career transformations like you did yourself.
Yes, but I also just say, like, I don't know if that's the singular reason. I think maybe there's many reasons, but I have trouble articulating it, maybe. So.
And what was your first course? What were you teaching?
Yeah, the first course was asynchronous Apex, and that was like a big thing for me at the time, because that was back in 2017, and what I've discovered is that I think probably to this day, a lot of people who start out learning Apex, they don't go on to learn the async stuff and learn why it's so important. One of my favorite interview questions to ask is, what is the difference between a future method and a queuable job? Mm-hmm. And most candidates can't exactly tell you, and they can't tell you why you'd want to use one over the other. And it was so important to one of the individual use cases that I was working on shortly before I produced that course that I thought it would be a really great first course to do. Because it turns out that with queuables, you can do a tremendous amount of processing over and above what you can normally do in just the synchronous triggers and with regular batch Apex that's running serially. Because queuables, in general, while they might be added to the queue one at a time, they often will run in parallel. And if you throw maybe 50 of them in, each of which might contain several hundred records to process for whatever your operation is. And I think most orgs, you'll get about 20 of them running at a time.
Really?
Yes.
20 at a time, so like in parallel?
In parallel.
20.
Because again, you're adding each queuable job one at a time, but then they'll start getting pulled from the queue and they'll be running simultaneously. So yeah, in parallel.
So then why do we even use batch jobs then? If we can.
Well, the good thing that you can do is you can combine queuables with batch Apex. So you get a batch job, you have the batch job throw a bunch of queuables into the queue, and now you have massive parallelization, and you're consuming the batch Apex job for less time, which then frees you up to run any other batch Apex you might need, because you can only run 5 of those jobs in parallel in the org
Interesting.
as it is. So instead of
Oh,
having long-running batch Apex running all the time for whatever reason, if you have a really big org, really busy org, well, just get all the work into queuables right away. It'll get done way faster, and you'll have the batch Apex limit freed up.
wow. Maybe I'll watch your Pluralsight. I have premium membership, so I'll check out your course.
Yeah, and I'm so happy that I've gotten some feedback from that very first course. There was one person who, because I teach that pattern in the course, and there's someone who ended up writing me and saying what a giant difference it made for them, because they ended up doing that same thing, putting all their major work into these parallel running sort of worker processes and letting everything go to work. And when you think about it, if you're coming from other languages, it makes sense. We have all these things with other languages. JavaScript has promises, and we have it's not parallel, right? But we have async await, and we have multi-core processing with traditional programming languages. But people generally look at Salesforce and they think that it's not this thing that is capable of monstrous performance, but sometimes it kind of is. You can really get a lot out of it, more so than maybe many might think. A lot of people are tempted to go off platform really fast, but if you know how to approach the problem, you'll be surprised how much you can do and how fast it runs.
Cool.
Yeah.
How does Pluralsight work? I know one of the differences between Udemy and Pluralsight is that in Udemy you buy the course. In Pluralsight you buy monthly membership. And how does Pluralsight compensate? Is it like however more people watch you? Is it like how does this work? I was always curious how it works for the authors, because not as simple as in Udemy.
Yeah, so it's a monthly subscription fee, and you get access to the entire library.
Yep.
They have, I don't know how many courses they have now. When I joined, they had over 6,000. I'm sure it's over 7,000, 8,000 now, something like that. I don't even know what the number is off the top of my head. But yeah, you get access to the entire library for the subscription fee. And then the way that it works is for authors, they pay a fee up front to the author
Really?
to produce the course, and then you get a royalty ongoing based on how many hours of content are being consumed by the viewers. So your compensation is kind of directly proportional to how many people are viewing and going through the course.
Cool. Cool. And is it difficult to get selected to be an instructor on Pluralsight?
I don't know. I hear that it is, because I think I've heard that there are a number of people who try and they don't get there. It's really hard to tell. When I honestly, when I was starting out with them, I was trying to ask them, so what can I expect, right? Like, what is it that you're looking for? And I did eventually get some answers, but it was difficult there's not a lot of information out there. There's a few blog posts and things like that as far as becoming an author, what the process is, although I haven't looked in a while, I guess. But it was hard for me to find how many people try and don't get in versus how many people do. And how would you even collect data on that right now? I don't know. But basically what they do is they have you go through kind of an audition process. You put together kind of a clip that is kind of considered an audition clip, where you go and you teach content in whatever you're submitting to them, and it has to meet their standards. You have to have a certain technical quality on the audio, especially, which is really important to them. So I think the reason that more people probably don't do more people don't become a Pluralsight author in general might be because it requires that crossover skill in like video production, or audio recording quality and things like that. It requires you to learn a little bit in that space to get the production quality that they're looking for. So I'm sure that's part of the reason why there's not kind of a massive influx of authors
That's
all the
amazing.
time. Yeah.
So now you're teaching Salesforce. Previously, you were struggling to learn Salesforce. Congratulations on this transition. And I think people like you are especially good at teaching because you know how difficult it is to learn Salesforce. You can empathize better with people who come from non-IT background.
I try, although I always like to joke that when people ask about me originally planning to become a counselor, I always tell them, well, I would have made a terrible counselor. But yeah, I mean, it's been quite a journey. It definitely has been. And, I think under certain circumstances, there's just certain points where you end up choosing to spend your time a very certain way based on your experience. I have a lot on my plate today, a lot of different projects and things that I work on and all that. And I remember that there was a point in my life where I kind of decided to go that route with how I choose to spend my time. So many of us today are caught up in sort of drama-related things, politics, social media, and so on. And my experience is that a lot of that is just noise getting in your way, I think. So I just try to stay focused and keep moving forward.
Scott, what do you love the most about being a Salesforce developer compared to being like a security guard or a psychologist, aspiring psychologist? What do you love the most about being a Salesforce developer?
I think the thing I really love about so the thing I love about development, I think the most in general, is that you feel like you're a part of where the world is going. Some people are afraid of technology, and they're afraid of things like job displacement and being left behind, and those are not bad concerns to have. Those are real problems and real concerns that are happening. But on the bright side of things, on the positive side, the world is changing around us in ways that I think if folks can figure out how the social fabric will adapt, they are incredibly positive changes. Labor in general is becoming a thing of the past, and to be a part of that is extremely exciting, because I think we're going to have a society in the future that is going to have very, very little, if any, hard labor in the long term. Something that I think all of our ancestors who came before us have been kind of fighting to get to. And to kind of see that emerging in the world is just incredibly fascinating. So I would say in general, that's kind of my favorite thing about development. My favorite thing about Salesforce is probably just the way that it has made everything so accessible. And we are not done seeing tools like it, where there's categories of applications and there are point and click tools for putting those applications together. We're going to see more of that. And I think what a lot of folks are unaware of about Salesforce is that I see it all the time on LinkedIn. People say it's a CRM, it's a CRM. No, it's not a CRM. it's much more than a CRM. It's a generalized development platform now for
Yeah.
any CRUD application you want. Create, read, update, delete. Whatever database-driven application you want for data entry, reporting, running your business in any way. I mean, there's companies that all of their departments are running inside of Salesforce now. Their HR, their billing and accounting,
Yeah.
of course their sales and marketing, but I mean the whole business, and that's pretty amazing, I think.
Yes, I agree. I agree. I work for a company that develops an accounting app. It's like doing QuickBooks within Salesforce. So
Yeah,
you can pretty much develop any business app you want on Salesforce, right? And
yeah, and I think that's their special sauce. You know, it's really just, it has not been just a CRM in many years now.
yeah,
Even back when I started, I mean, it wasn't. So
cool. And my last question to you, Scott, probably is, if you could advise someone who's trying to become a Salesforce developer, they're trying to get their first Salesforce job, what 3 things would you suggest they do?
oh my gosh, only 3. Um, I guess point number 1, take advantage of all of the free resources. That's number 1. There are hours and hours and hours and hours and hours of free YouTube videos. Go watch the YouTube videos. All the documentation is open and free to you. Trailhead did not exist when I started. It does now. Um, that is just groundbreaking. Um, don't let money or resources feel like that's something that needs to stop you. I mean, learning in general has never been so inexpensive as it is today. Um, Obviously, I would like to tell everyone to sign up for Pluralsight, but I'll also say it's not necessary to get to where I am. You can still get there without even paying that, you know, $30-something a month or whatever it is that they're currently charging, right? So um, that's point number 1. Take advantage of free resources. Let's see. Point number would be don't feel down on yourself if what you do is not so good at first, because you will get better. Um, especially if you're going to write code, the first code you write will not be good. Um, you must do everything one tiny little step at a time. A lot of people get overwhelmed. A lot of people think that when anyone tells you you're going to go off and learn to build apps, well, the thing about that is you build apps in thousands of tiny little pieces. So don't expect that just because you've been at this for even 5 or 6 weeks, you feel like you don't have anything to show for it. Don't let that stop you, right? You will get there. You just need to keep going. And every tiny little question that you ask, you know, use those free resources, because the answer is probably there, sitting, just waiting for you to utilize, right? Maybe don't be afraid to ask for help. Would be something. The community is unbelievably supportive. I think Salesforce has one of the best communities in the world as far as software is concerned. We have people from all different backgrounds and you know, all different origin stories, from people who began as security guards or whatever, to including some of the most talented and smart people from all over the world, right? And you might think that they are inaccessible to you, and they are generally not. You'll be surprised, I think, if you reach out to them. So maybe those are my 3. I might have a different 3 if you ask me again in 6 months, but maybe we'll go with this.
Yeah, that's a good. So first is use Trailblazer and other free resources out there, like on YouTube, documentation, blogs. Second one is don't be afraid to just write code. Yeah, don't overcomplicate things and try to make it perfect code.
Yeah. Basically, just accept that whatever you do at first will not be perfect and good, and everything is done in tiny steps.
Yes, just start. Yeah, you gotta start
Yes.
somewhere. And third is you said don't be afraid to ask for help, right?
Yes.
One of the biggest challenges of people who are starting or who are trying to get their first Salesforce developer job is that all job requirements say like 2 years, 3 years, and it's very hard to find a Salesforce developer job where they accept entry level or junior Salesforce developers. Any thoughts on that?
Sometimes that can stop you in your tracks, but the other thing I'll say is apply anyway, um, because most of the time, years of experience can be overridden with what it is that you're actually capable of. And what I have found is that a lot of people actually underestimate how much they know. They don't
Mm,
overestimate it. Uh, so, you know, and the other thing is when you go and if you land interviews, even if you don't get the offer at the end of the interview, the more interviews you do, the closer you are to a yes. And just treat every interview as practice. Um, you know, don't be afraid to make mistakes. You will learn a lot from every single one. And you know, even if you don't have the 2, 3, 5 years experience or whatever that they put in that job description, if you can demonstrate to them and you can tell them concretely how you can benefit their company and their business, you know, and use real sort of numbers and real examples of that in your interview, that goes a very, very long way. That has always been my focus in job interviews, is asking about their business and describing to them how I imagine I can make a giant difference for them. And it so far it seems to have worked out pretty well. But
So people who ask good questions, people who show that they did the research, read the news maybe about us. I don't know, maybe they had like informational interviews with someone at the company, and if they come prepared to the interview, they stand out for you.
yeah, I mean, technical proficiency. So you know, if you study and you're studying consistently and you know the process for development or for admin or for the business analyst positions or whatever it is you're going for, if you can show point by point in detail how you know those things, it makes a giant difference.
Mm.
Because as someone who is on the other side of the table and who does interviews, what we see on a resume is typically the a very tiny piece of what we end up deciding about the candidate. What we care more about is we care if when we ask how you might get something done, how well you're able to describe how you get from A to B. So if we say, you know, for example, if we're having trouble uh, with opportunity forecasting, what might you do to help us with that? And they're able to describe, oh, well, you know, I would use opportunity history reporting. I would use reporting snapshots. You'll want to aggregate your data so that you're able to look at first quarter, second quarter, 3 quarters back, and they're able to tell you the details of the real world example of how they would solve the problem. That's better than anything. You know, that's better than anything you can put on paper. And then especially if you put a laptop in front of them and they know exactly where to go in the setup menu to start building something on the spot. That's super powerful. And you know, again, if you've been studying for weeks or months on how these things work and you have those fundamental skills, sometimes just being able to demo that for someone is incredibly powerful. So that would be my advice. And don't give up. I know that's the cliche thing, right? But keep at it. And I think eventually, you know, most people have a real chance of getting there, especially with the kind of demand we have and the kind of growth we have, both from the standpoint of general IT jobs across, you know, across the world. And if you're in the United States, especially, growth is extremely strong. And Salesforce especially, you know, the demand is just wildly up there. So
Cool. Scott, thank you so much for your time. Fascinating story.
thanks for having me.